Late one night, I stumbled upon a YouTube channel I had never seen before. As a horror enthusiast, I loved exploring obscure corners of the internet for spooky content. This channel, Spectral Sightings, had only a handful of videos, but their thumbnails were eerily captivating images of abandoned houses, dense forests at twilight, and unsettlingly realistic shadows. The channel's latest video was titled The Last Upload. Intrigued, I clicked on it. The video began with a shaky handheld camera view of an old dilapidated house. The narrator's voice was distorted and echoed unnaturally. He explained that this house was rumored to be haunted by the spirit of a woman who disappeared mysteriously 50 years ago. The narrator claimed that anyone who visited the house and disrespected the spirit would meet a dreadful fate. I watched as the narrator entered the house. The inside was just as decrepit as the outside, peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and a thick layer of dust covering everything. As he walked through the house, he pointed out various spots where paranormal activity had been reported. A cold spot by the fireplace, whispers near the staircase, and an apparition in the bedroom mirror. I felt a chill run down my spine as the camera lingered on the cracked mirror. The narrator said that the mirror was where the woman's spirit was most often seen. He dared viewers to look into it and recite an old incantation. With a shaky breath, I found myself repeating the words along with the narrator. Suddenly, the video glitched. The screen went black for a moment before the video resumed, but now the camera was focused on a different scene. It was my bedroom. The angle was from the corner of the ceiling, like a hidden camera. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the screen. The narrator's distorted voice returned, now more menacing, saying, "You've invited her in. She's with you now." So I'm just coming back from a night out with my work friends. I left there at around 11 at night, took a drive because the weather was nice. I got to my road just before midnight. The tires were pretty messed up. There was a constant thumping noise when I drove. I'm moving my head around the car as I drive, hoping to pinpoint the sound to a certain tire so I could check for uneven wear. My head was kind of pointed down and to the right, listening to the front passenger tire, when I caught a glimpse of a white dress in the middle of the road. I quickly looked up and saw a little girl, 14 to 18 years old, just standing there, staring at me, as if she had seen a ghost. I stopped moving, and we stared at each other for a second before I continued down the road. I immediately thought of those YouTube videos of someone driving down a dark, misty road, and out of nowhere, some lady in a white hospital gown is in the middle of the road and gets hit or something. A million thoughts went through my head. Who's this girl? I know everybody on my road. Why is she out here so late? Does she need help? What's with the dress this late at night? I pulled a U-turn and went back to her. As I pulled up, the first thing I said was, "Hey, you okay?" She said, "Yes, I'm fine." I asked her what she was doing, and she said, "Just taking a walk." But at midnight, she looked terrified. I told her I wasn't trying to scare her and she wasn't in trouble. I also told her I thought she was a ghost and I wanted to figure out what was going on. She told me she lived down the road and she was going back there. Never seen her before. I know everybody who lives on my road. I said, "All right, as long as you're okay, I just wanted to make sure." And I U-turned again and went back toward my house. I looked in the mirror and I saw her immediately turn into the next driveway, even though she told me she lived further down. Once I got home, I walked down the road to where she went. She was gone. There was no trace of her. Either that or she was hiding from me. I don't know. I feel really bad for scaring her. I just wanted to make sure she was safe. But something was off about her. It was like she was sleepwalking or something. She seemed scared and yet disassociated. Her words were slow but uptight and reclusive. I mean, who the heck wears a white dress at midnight in the middle of the road? Come on, you can't do that. There are two types of school teachers. Those who come early and those who stay late. I've always been one of the former. Most days I arrive at school prior to sunup. This is a story that happened around 6:30 a.m. before the light of day. It's also something I still think of often because it's extremely disturbing. There was a large parking lot in the back of the school that was unseen from the main road. It was approximately a quarter of a mile back. Unless you knew it was back there, you wouldn't go looking for it. I was the first person there that morning, as usual. I was waiting to hear the end of a newscast when I saw headlights pull in behind me. This was out of the ordinary because most teachers wouldn't show up till around 7 a.m. I also was thrown due to the fact this person left their lights on, and instead of parking in a space, they stayed behind me, parked at an angle. I thought about getting out of my car, but decided I'd wait until more teachers showed up. At first I thought maybe it was a parent, but the more I watched them, I began to think this person was sinister. They rolled down their window and smoked a cigarette. It was a white male with a scraggly beard and hair, rough appearance. We sat there in total silence for 15 to 20 minutes, and all the while, this guy never took his eye off the back of that school. When a few teachers showed up, I hopped out of my car. All of us thought he was odd. I called my principal. He didn't answer, but later I mentioned the entire story to our campus cop. He said he checked the cameras. Later that cop came looking for me and he seemed rattled. He wanted to know if by any chance I'd gotten the car's plate. I didn't. He looked dejected. He turned to me and said that he'd watched this guy pull in at 6:30 and then wait, watching for about an hour or more, and then leave. He had no reason to be there. The police officer said the man's body language and overall vibe was very concerning. In hindsight, I don't think he was interested in me or the teachers. This feels crazy to me. In December of 2022, I had a dream about my ex from 2019. In the dream, there were many people preparing for a trip. I didn't recognize the house or the people, except for my ex. He was following me around while I packed. I didn't know what I was packing for at the time, but he kept saying, "We have to go, we have to go." This went on for a while until I realized we were in an empty airport heading to a plane. The plane was dark, with the only light coming from the open door at the back where people were boarding. Inside the plane, there was a solid black wall at the front, almost like a black hole. Everyone sat facing it. My ex was sitting next to me, and I was in the aisle seat. As the plane started to take off, I asked him, "Where are we going?" He replied, "Arizona." I panicked, saying, "Arizona? I don't know anyone there." Feeling uneasy and anxious, I decided I couldn't go, so I headed towards the back of the plane, which was now open with escalators and stairs covered in velvet flooring, like the entrance to an opera auditorium. At the top, there was someone like a bellboy, but I walked past and found myself back in the same house from the beginning of the dream. My ex was there on the sidewalk, looking very healthy. I apologized, saying I didn't know anyone in Arizona. He smiled, turned, and walked away. He got into a brown old Cadillac with someone in the driver's seat. They drove off. I woke up sweating and completely confused. I decided to look him up on Facebook. It turned out there was a memorial on his page indicating his passing 2 days prior. I feel like he was trying to take me with him. As a child, I grew up watching horror movies with my older sister. I always had a sense that hauntings could be real. However, it wasn't until I played with a Ouija board with that same sister that I became a true believer. At the age of 13, I conducted a seance to contact my great-grandfather. Years later, I discovered that he had died suddenly, and his father, my great-great-grandfather, had been murdered in the 1800s when he immigrated to Canada from the UK. I vividly remember the planchette moving around after we asked some forbidden questions, like, "How did you die?" My sister became frightened and urged me to stop moving it. We abruptly ended the session without properly saying goodbye. As the years passed and my sister moved out, I found myself as a deeply depressed teenager. Strange occurrences began happening in my home. Glasses would smash in the kitchen, the rocking chair would rock on its own, and I witnessed a kitchen chair being dragged across the floor and positioned as if someone were sitting in it, watching me. I often felt a chilling sensation of being watched in the basement, where the seance had taken place. Once, a book fell on my head, seemingly out of nowhere. There were other times when I was awakened by my dog barking, only to find myself alone in the house, with the bedroom door opening by itself and pushing against me as if someone were trying to enter. These experiences left me feeling terrified and convinced that there was a presence in my home, unseen but undeniably real. Around half a decade ago, when I was living in my old house at the age of 7, I had some experiences that I'd like to share with you. The first one occurred when I woke up unusually early, around 4:30 a.m. Unable to fall back asleep, I headed downstairs to the living room to play on my Xbox until my dad woke up and breakfast was ready. As I turned on the console, I noted that my brother had left a game in it. I wanted to play a different one. When I went to eject the disc and replace it, a sudden gust of wind hit my ear, as if someone were blowing directly into it. It was still dark, no windows or doors were open, and I was facing away from the console when it happened. But that wasn't the most perplexing experience. The second one occurred late at night, around 9 p.m., which was late for me at the time. I was tucked into bed with my blanket up to my eyes, only able to see glimpses of the room. The hallway was lit because the bathroom light was on. I could see a small area of the top corner of my door. Just before drifting off to sleep, that tiny area went dark and then back to light, as if someone had passed by. I ruled out the possibility of it being my brother or dad, because they were both in different parts of the house, and there was no accompanying sound of footsteps on the noisy stairs. The final experience, perhaps the strangest, occurred around 8 a.m. I had just woken up but wasn't fully ready to get up. I kept drifting in and out of sleep. Suddenly, I felt a tug of about 5 centimeters down my bed. It wasn't alarming at the time. I simply got up without much thought. However, that incident leaves me feeling unsettled. It wasn't a slip or a movement caused by me. That tug, it felt like a genuine tug, as if somebody was in my room. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, we visited my aunt's house for the day. My aunt adored me and always made sure to spend quality time with me. Their house was separate from others and had a children's park nearby, which my aunt often took me to during the day. That night, as I slept beside my mother, my aunt quietly woke me up and led me by the hand to the park next to the house. It was late, perhaps around 3 a.m. She pushed me on the swing without saying a word. Despite my young age, something felt off. My usually lively aunt was silent and wore an expressionless face as she swung me. Afterwards, she silently guided me back to bed beside my mother. As a young child, I didn't question the strangeness of the situation too much. However, years later, I vividly remembered the event and knew it was no dream. When I asked my family about it, they insisted that it couldn't have been my aunt. Some suggested it might have been a jinn, a supernatural being, that had taken a liking to me. While I'm uncertain about the jinn explanation, I can say with certainty that it was not my aunt. She wasn't prone to sleepwalking, and her behavior that night was unlike her usual self. Though tales of jinn are common in our area, I've never heard of one showing affection toward children. Perhaps it was not a jinn, but some other mysterious entity. Regardless, the experience remains a puzzle to me to this day. My son and I had a few weird, unexplainable encounters in a park in our town. We both would see a black woman walking around that was dressed oddly, as in what looked like something from centuries ago, and maybe even African. She was dressed in long robes, and her hair was up in a turban-like wrapping around her head. She'd always stare right into our eyes, but never say a word. She would just keep walking. I started researching the area because I felt she could be otherworldly. I got the vibe that she might have been a shaman or witch trapped in our dimension, but she looked as real as anyone. I found out that there was a cemetery directly beside the park where poor black families were buried sometime in the 1800s. I was talking to my son about the woman and what I found out about the cemetery. We were sitting in my SUV in the park. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a solid black doe leapt over the front of my SUV before running off in the direction of the cemetery. We looked at each other and I said, "No way, did you see that?" To which my son said that he did. This park is in the middle of the city, so not really near any forest or anything. So where did the deer come from? What could it mean? It felt related to the woman to me. When I was 10 years old, I witnessed something that still baffles me 6 years later. I was outside playing with my friends Nate and Donnie, enjoying our time together in our neighborhood. It's important to note that the area where I live has only one entrance and exit, meaning any vehicles entering must pass through this point. On this particular day, as we were walking, we saw an old-fashioned, completely white, double-decker bus driving down the road. We stopped in confusion because it seemed impossible for the bus to be there without entering through the entrance, which it didn't. Inside the bus, there were two individuals. The driver, a man dressed in 1920s style clothing, had snow-colored hair and pale, almost translucent skin. The most intriguing person, however, was a woman who resembled the driver in her complete whiteness. She was a passenger in the bus, and she waved at us. Despite the strangeness of the situation, they didn't seem threatening. Rather, they exuded warmth and benevolence. The whole encounter lasted only 5 seconds, but it left a lasting impression on me. As the bus passed by, it didn't fade away or drive off. It simply vanished into thin air. I couldn't explain it then, and I still can't now. I kept this experience to myself until recently, when I shared it with my mother. Unlike me, she believes in the supernatural. She recounted having a dream around the same time about her late mother, who passed away just before I was born. In the dream, her mother said she had to catch a bus. While I'm skeptical about the connection, I can't deny that what I saw that day was anything but normal. As a kid, I used to live in an old home in the suburbs of Perth, Western Australia. The home was built in 1939, and I believe it was war housing for vets after the Second World War. My parents bought the house in 2000. The original home was at the front of the house, which had small creaky wooden floorboards and high ceilings. It only had about 3 rooms. My room, my sister's room, and a playroom. And this part of the house was where a lot of the activity was centered. A hallway connected the old house to what was originally the backyard, but had been renovated to add a large modern wing onto the existing structure. My parents' room was in this wing. I lived there until I was about 12 years old, and my experience begins at around age 5 or 6. I started to hate sleeping in my room, and being in that part of the house in general. Every time I was there, I felt uneasy, even during broad daylight, and I had no idea why. Activity was usually focused in the toy room, the biggest room in that part of the house. Small things like toys moving, going missing, and turning on in the middle of the night when they were switched off hours prior. The first experience I had was when I was around 5. I had a vivid night terror of a dirt-covered black glove reaching out from under my pillow and attempting to grab me. When I told my parents, they seemed unbothered, although now I know this wasn't the case. This comes into play later. When I was around 7, I remember a Barbie keyboard my sister had. It turned on and played some sort of tune late at night. My sister woke me up as any kid would, and we both went and woke up our parents. When they heard what was happening, they were visibly on edge. This was not the first experience they had in that room. After some apprehension, my dad went in and turned the keyboard off. When he did that, the ceiling light wouldn't turn on. However, it worked in the morning. Another occasion involving toys happened in my room. I was around 8 years old. I had a 2008 Mummy's Gold Matchbox toy set. If anyone is unfamiliar with it, it's a battery-powered track which, once a Matchbox car runs over a button, or if the button is pushed, it activates a mummy's eyes to glow and a voice saying, "I've got you now." I was having trouble sleeping one night. I was wide awake, so I know this wasn't some hallucination. From the dead silence of night, I heard, "I've got you now." I jolted to look at the track. Its arms were moving up and down repeatedly. This was not a function the toy had. Its arms were only meant to move up and down once. After a few seconds, it stopped. I had been playing with it earlier, and I distinctly remember switching it off. I didn't sleep well that night, if I did at all. I started sleeping on the couch in the living room after this. I can recall multiple occasions in which a clock would fall off the wall, no matter where it was placed or what we used to hang it up. It fell off every time. The activity was fairly quiet for the remaining years we lived there. Basic spirit stuff like bangs, scratching noises, a cold breeze when there were no windows or doors open, dogs barking at doorways and corners when there's nothing there. We finally moved out in 2013. It was only years later when my parents told me about their experiences. They're now divorced, and they rarely agree on anything, except what happened in that house. They told me the toy room used to be my sister's room when she was a baby. Baby monitors recording sounds of a lullaby player, which had no batteries in it. Or it'd be put away in a closet, only to mysteriously reattach to the crib again. But by far the most disturbing account is that of a dark figure. Both my parents woke up in the dead of night, only to see a tall, dark figure, around 6 feet tall, wearing a trench coat, standing over them. The figure disappeared after a blink. My parents only saw him once. Just talking about it still makes them feel uneasy. The part that terrifies me is their account of the gloves. The figure over them wore the same gloves, the same black, dirty gloves that I had seen in my night terror as a child.